Music is mathematics. It actually helps the analytical side of your brain. I've always called it emotional mathematics because you're trying.
His departure was not marked by bitterness or scandal, but by a quiet resolve to follow his own artistic compass. Gregg Rolie stepped away from the whirlwind of Santana at the very moment the band was gaining iconic status, choosing peace of mind over fame. For many, walking away from such success would be unthinkable, but for Rolie, authenticity was more important than adoration. And he didn't vanish for long. Just a few years later, he co-founded a new band with guitarist Neil Schon, another Santana alum. That band would soon become known as Journey. In Journey's early years, Rolie again took on duo roles, keyboardist and lead vocalist, helping to shape the band's progressive rock roots before it shifted into the more radio-friendly arena rock sound of the late 70s and 80s. His distinctive voice led hits like "Feeling That Way" and "Anytime," and his keyboard work remained central to the band's sound. But when Steve Perry joined Journey in 1977, the group took a dramatic turn toward pop-rock stardom. Rolie, ever the team player, adapted and continued contributing musically and vocally, harmonizing with Perry on some of the band's biggest early hits. Still, fame never sat comfortably with Gregg Rolie. The grind of the music business, the spotlight, the growing creative differences, it all took its toll. In 1980, Rolie did what few in rock history have done twice. He walked away from another massively successful band. Once again, he didn't chase headlines or stir drama. He simply left, returning to a quieter life where music was no longer a performance but a practice. Over the years, Gregg Rolie stayed connected to his musical roots. He released solo albums, collaborated with other artists, and occasionally reunited with old bandmates, but always on his own terms. Whether performing with Ringo Starr's all-star band or joining Santana again for their 2016 reunion album Santana 4, Rolie's presence was felt more than seen, subtle, but unmistakable. Today, Gregg Rolie stands as one of the few musicians twice inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, first with Santana, then with Journey. Yet, despite this rare achievement, he remains one of the most humble, grounded figures in rock history. He never needed to shout to be heard, never needed drama to leave a mark. His legacy is written not in tabloid headlines, but in melodies that endure, melodies that carried the soul of a quiet man who let the music speak louder than fame ever could. It was not a defeat, it was a moment of integrity, and the beginning of a new, equally remarkable chapter, a journey called Journey, where Gregg Rolie would once again rise and shape a new voice for rock in the 1970s. After leaving Santana in 1972, Rolie didn't lose his way, but he didn't rush into anything either. Walking away from a band at its peak meant turning down fame, money, and countless opportunities. But Rolie was never one to chase the spotlight. He needed time to listen to himself and figure out whether music was still a calling or just a memory. During that quiet period, he stayed in touch with Neil Schon, the young guitarist who had played alongside him in Santana. Both men had grown disillusioned with Carlos Santana's increasingly spiritual vision for the band and felt it was time to create something different, music played not for philosophical breakthroughs, but from pure instinct. In 1973, they founded Journey together, aiming to push rock into the crossroads of technique and emotion. In the early days, the band focused on progressive rock fused with jazz fusion, complex, experimental, and musically ambitious. Gregg Rolie took on dual roles as lead vocalist and keyboardist, bringing his legendary Hammond B3 organ to the center of the band's sound. Journey released their debut album in 1975, a pure progressive rock effort where instrumentals dominated and Rolie's deep, swirling Hammond tone and raw, bluesy voice were at the core. Though it wasn't a commercial hit, it was a bold musical statement. Looking to the future, 1976, and next, 1977, continued this exploration, but their cerebral style struggled to connect with mainstream audiences. Columbia Records began pushing for a more accessible sound and a new lead singer, an early sign that the era of Rolie's lead vocals was coming to an end. In 1977, after a series of internal meetings, Steve Perry, a young tenor nicknamed the Sam Cooke of rock, was brought in. Gregg Rolie welcomed Perry, not with resentment, but with a clear-eyed understanding of what his arrival meant. Rolie knew Perry's voice had mass appeal, and he accepted that his own time as Journey's frontman was ending. The 1978 album Infinity marked a major shift. Perry was now the vocal centerpiece, while Rolie stepped into the background, focusing on keyboards and harmonies. But behind the scenes, it was Rolie who mentored Perry in those early days, helping him understand the band's musical language and keep internal tensions from boiling over. Only Rolie, the founder who knew when to lead and when to step back, could have done that. Infinity became a massive success, followed by Evolution, 1979, and Departure, 1980, launching Journey into rock superstardom. But for Rolie, the grind of endless touring, growing creative differences, and the band's shift away from its experimental roots wore thin. In 1980, after completing Departure, Rolie decided to step away. There was no drama, no tension. He even recommended his own replacement, Jonathan Cain, from the Babies. He personally handed over the Hammond B3, a symbolic and respectful transition. "I'm proud of Journey's success," Rolie later said, "but I was no longer truly part of it, and I didn't want to lose my integrity just to keep going." Rolie returned to a quieter life, where his wife, Lori, and their 2 young children waited. For nearly 2 decades that followed, he lived without platinum albums or sold-out tours, but with something no stage could offer: peace, truth, and family. These were the quiet years, and then came the return. After leaving Journey in 1980, Gregg Rolie disappeared from the public eye. No new singles, no interviews, no late-night show appearances. To the public, it seemed as though he had walked away for good. But in truth, he had simply entered a new chapter, one reserved for things that didn't need to be loud. He became a husband, a father, and lived quietly near Austin, Texas. He drove his kids to school, read in the evenings, and played music for the joy of it, not for the charts. But music never left him. In 1991, Rolie returned, not under the bright lights, but alongside old friends. He joined former Journey members Ross Valerie and Steve Smith to form a new band called The Storm. There were no blockbuster ambitions, just seasoned musicians playing for the love of it. Yet their single, "I've Got a Lot to Learn About Love," unexpectedly climbed to number 6 on the Billboard Rock chart, proving that Rolie still had the magic. Though their second album, Eye of the Storm, was shelved due to changing industry tastes and the rise of grunge, Rolie remained undeterred. The spotlight had moved on, but Gregg Rolie, ever steady, continued on his own terms. In 1998, he returned once more to his roots, reuniting with former Santana bandmates, including Carlos Santana, for a new creative chapter. Gregg Rolie's story was never one of flashy headlines, but of quiet, enduring impact. His was a journey not just through music, but through life, lived with humility, integrity, and a deep reverence for the sound that first called him. Michael Shreve and Jose Arias joined Gregg Rolie to form Abraxas Pool, a band steeped in the spirit of Latin rock and built upon the roots they had once laid down together in Santana. Their debut album was more than a nostalgic reunion, it was a statement. Despite being in their 50s, these seasoned musicians still had the power to stir the soul with rhythm, melody, and heart. Though Abraxas Pool was short-lived, it gave Rolie something priceless: peace with a past he had once left behind amid creative tension. For the first time in nearly 30 years, he played those old songs with old friends, this time with no friction, just music and mutual respect. After decades as the frontman, co-founder, and lead vocalist for 2 legendary bands, Gregg Rolie began his solo career with a completely different purpose. He wasn't chasing hits or fame, he simply wanted to express himself, authentically and freely. In 1985, he released his debut solo album, Gregg Rolie, a personal musical manifesto that blended album-oriented rock with smooth guitar work and his signature Hammond organ. Though the song, "I Want to Go Back," didn't chart significantly at the time, it later became a hit for Eddie Money, a quiet testament to Rolie's songwriting brilliance that often flew under the radar. His second solo effort, Gringo, released in 1987, was bolder and more eclectic. It marked a return to his Latin rock roots while weaving in world music, jazz, and funk influences. Though it wasn't widely promoted, critics praised Gringo as his most character-rich work, a fusion of old and new that reflected both his past and evolving vision. After focusing on family and occasional performances with the Storm and Abraxas Pool, Rolie returned in 2001 with Roots, an album that lived up to its name. It was unpolished, spontaneous, and unconcerned with mainstream appeal. Instead, it offered blues, soul, and jam band flavors, with Rolie acting as vocalist, keyboardist, and producer. It resonated deeply with loyal fans who saw it as a raw and truthful reflection of a man who still loved music, even if he no longer played for charts. Then, in 2019, came Sonic Ranch, recorded at the famed Texas studio of the same name. The album brought together everything that defined Gregg Rolie's sound: Latin rhythms, classic rock foundations, and a voice now aged, yet more honest than ever. Songs like What About Love? And Don't Be Cruel weren't just music. They were confessions from a man who had walked through fame and found comfort not in applause, but in the companionship of music itself. Gregg Rolie's solo career never needed fanfare. It was a quiet return to essence, to storytelling through chords, and to living truthfully with his Hammond B3. In his personal life, Gregg Rolie stood as a rare exception in the rock world, a man without scandal, burnout, or tabloid drama. He married Lori Rolie in the late 1970s, just as Journey was taking off. She was a flight attendant, he a touring musician, and their story was grounded not in glamour but in understanding. As Journey rocketed to global success, Gregg made a decision few would dare. He stepped away to become a full-time father. "I didn't want to be the man known only through music magazines but a stranger to his own kids," he once said. He and Lori raised 2 children, a son and a daughter, while his former bandmates continued racking up hits. As they graced arenas, Gregg was remodeling a home garage into a music room, teaching his kids how to play, and showing up at parent-teacher meetings. When Lori wrote a children's book series called Mimi's Little World, inspired by their family, Gregg composed the music for the audiobooks, a quiet reflection of the way he's always lived, never needing center stage, just wanting to be part of something meaningful. The Rolie family lives near Austin, Texas, in a home filled with music, a small garden, and a pace slow enough to hear the faint echo of a Hammond organ on a quiet afternoon. While he once shook Madison Square Garden with thundering performances, today his joy comes from casual jam sessions, his grandchild's innocent question, "Were you really famous?" and sunsets that no longer hurry him. He's never made headlines for personal scandal, never had to apologize for public missteps. Not because he was perfect, but because Gregg Rolie always knew the value of silence. For him, it wasn't absence, it was presence. He didn't make noise because he didn't have to. Legacy and influence. Gregg Rolie may not have been the face on magazine covers or the flashiest name in rock history, but his impact is undeniable. He didn't lead a cultural revolution or headline sensational movements, but he shaped the sound of 2 of the greatest bands of all time. Twice inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, once for Santana, and again for Journey, he remains the quiet architect behind the hits, the foundation beneath the anthems, and the heartbeat inside the music. He didn't demand recognition. He earned it, one honest note at a time. Gregg Rolie never dove into politics or spiritual doctrine, but he accomplished something that few musicians in history ever have. He helped shape the signature sound at the birth of not just one, but 2 legendary bands. With Santana, he was the original lead vocalist, the soul behind Black Magic Woman, Evil Ways, and Oklahoma, Virginia. He didn't just sing, he was the heart of those early tracks, with his hands on the Hammond B3 organ bringing Latin rock to major American stages for the first time, from Fillmore West to Woodstock. While Carlos Santana gazed toward the cosmos and spiritual awakening, Rolie kept the music grounded, anchoring it with blues rock roots that made it accessible even to audiences who had never heard a conga drum before. With Journey, Rolie helped launch a completely different chapter: American progressive rock, technical, powerful, and built for stadiums. Though the band's first 3 albums weren't commercial hits, they laid the foundation for what would become one of the most successful rock acts of all time. And when Steve Perry stepped into the spotlight, Gregg Rolie quietly stepped back, manning the keyboards, singing harmonies, and maintaining internal balance during a delicate power shift. Not many artists who once led a band could do that with such grace. 2 bands founded. 2 sonic blueprints laid. 2 exits made when he no longer felt he belonged. And for that, Gregg Rolie was honored twice by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, first in 1998 with Santana and again in 2017 with Journey. A rare achievement, and a well-deserved one for a man who always chose silence over self-congratulation. His influence doesn't come from grand statements, it comes from the sound he left behind, the blistering Hammond B3 that opens. Black Magic Woman. The voice thick as cigarette smoke yet rich with feeling, the solid, unshakable keyboard foundations beneath the flashier stars. It's the legacy of someone who never needed to stand in the spotlight to be a pillar. Gregg Rolie didn't rewrite rock history, but if you look closely, you'll find his signature on the opening pages of at least 2 of its greatest chapters. At 77, Gregg Rolie no longer appears on stage every night, but that doesn't mean he stopped living for music. On the contrary, he's now living with music more fully than ever. There's no pressure, no deadlines, and nothing left to prove. He and his wife, Lori Rolie, reside peacefully near Austin, Texas, where mornings begin in the garden and afternoons often end with a light jam session in his home studio. No grueling tour schedules. No high-stakes meetings. Just music, pure and personal. In 2024, he made a surprise appearance at a community music event at the University of Texas. He didn't perform a Santana or Journey hit. Instead, he guided the Longhorn Marching Band, encouraging them to play with emotion rather than just technique. These days, sharing inspiration matters more to him than applause. In October of the same year, his local community honored him as an artist of lasting influence, not just for his work on stage, but for his kindness, quiet strength, and enduring humility. People no longer call him the Legend of Santana, or the founder of Journey. They just call him Gregg, the artist. In a rare 2023 interview, when asked about his legacy, Rolie simply smiled and said, "I don't think I left anything that big behind. I was just lucky to be in the right place with the right people, and to listen to the voice inside. Music doesn't save the world, but it saved me." He still plays the keyboard every day, still records new songs, even if no one ever hears them, just to keep his heart from drying out. He continues to support Lori's children's book series and educational charity projects. He still sits on the porch at sunset, sipping tea, sometimes pressing play on an old recording, and smiling. Still sounds all right. Gregg Rolie doesn't seek an audience anymore. And yet, somehow, he still has one, those who grew up with Black Magic Woman, who fell in love with rock through Wheel in the Sky, and who found in him something rare, unwavering grace without the need for display. He was the first voice of Santana, the voice that opened the world to Latin rock. He was the trailblazer for Journey, laying the groundwork for one of the most successful American rock bands in history. The only artist inducted twice into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and yet, he chose a quiet life in Texas, surrounded by family, and his old Hammond B3. In an industry where people often have to shout to be heard, Gregg Rolie chose a different way, to play, to step back when needed, and to return only when the heart called. He is proof of a simple, lasting truth: pioneers don't need to stand in the middle of the road, they just need to carve a path and let the music, like water, find its own flow. Not everyone standing in the spotlight is a legend. Some, like Gregg Rolie, stand quietly behind it, and still manage to light up an entire era. If you've ever loved a Santana track or hummed along to a Journey melody, chances are, you've already passed through the world Gregg Rolie helped create. And if you'd like to keep discovering the untold journeys of music, don't forget to subscribe, because the best stories always begin where no one's looking. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.